Hello everybody, this is Jeffrey Booth here, back with the Jeffy B YouTube channel, and today I want to do something that I haven't really done before, and that is do a book review. Now, I want to preface this by saying there's something that I firmly believe, and I think that in modern culture, we focus way too much on how many books you read, and not how deeply you read the books and how deeply you understand the concept. So, time willing, my intention is that I'm not going to be doing these books just once and giving them a really quick review. Because honestly, how much of the book do you really get on the first time through? Maybe 10% of it, maybe 15%. So my intention is to do a first read review, which would be my review of my general thoughts about the book, the things I generally think about it, my initial impressions, and maybe some of the quotes and lessons that jumped out at me. And then I'll be doing a longer term review after I read it the second or third time. I do hope to read every book that actually matters to me a second or third time. If a book is not good, I will not read it more than once. But for those books I find value from, I will definitely give them a second, maybe even a third read and give you my thoughts on those. And then I hope to also make smaller tidbit videos based on the lessons I learned from books. And this is another point in another video that I'd like to cover soon, but self-help, philosophy, growth books can all be kind of harmful. And let me explain that a little bit. When you read a self-help book or something about philosophy or something that you feel like is going to help you become a better person, you get that sense that you're doing something, that you're becoming something, that you're working on a problem that you have or something in your character you would like to improve. Now, if all you do is read, are you really doing much to accomplish that feat? Are you really growing? Are you really becoming a better person? That is something that only you can answer for sure, but from my experience, I would say no. I gave myself the fluff. It was like eating a sugary drink. I felt like I accomplished something. I felt good in the moment, but I didn't internalize and, more importantly, act on the lessons I learned from the book. So one of the most important things that you can do when you're talking about self-help, personal growth, philosophy, is to actually really intake the information from any given book that you're reading. Make it yours. But more importantly, make sure you apply it to your life and you apply it to your relationship with the world. And that's tough, and I know that's tough, but that's what we're going to be focusing on. I'm going to be doing separate videos on the lessons I gain from books, as well as how I apply them to my life and how I use them in my day-to-day thinking. And maybe that will help you, maybe it won't, but I'm in this to fix me. With all that being said, today I'm here to do my initial review of Everything Is a book about hope. Now, one of the really cool and interesting things about this book, and it's going to challenge your thinking a little bit, but I think in a positive way, is that everybody thinks about hope as this grand virtue, this ephemeral thing that we can always hope to and have faith in, that we can always let us guide us as a North Star. And one of the things that Mark Manson, the author of this book, argues is that hope, in and of itself, is not necessarily a virtue, and that misplaced hope can actually lead not just individuals, but humanity down a very dark path. And I thought that was really interesting, and I don't think I'm ready to comment on whether I agree with that or not on my first read. I can certainly hear some of his points, and I can certainly see how hope is hijacked in many ways, and to the detriment of others. So, one of the really hilarious examples he uses in this book is the example of a cult. And he has this really hilarious, I think 4 or 5 chapter, how to build your own cult guide, sarcastic guide, of course, where he sort of details how hope and how, the human reward system is hijacked for nefarious purposes. But I'm not yet certain that hope in and of itself is evil. But I do agree with Mark in that we can transcend hope, and for 2 reasons: to live in the moment, to be the best person we can be now in this moment. There's a really great quote from this Third Eye Blind song, who's one of my favorite bands, a song called Monotough's Private Opera. And the line is so simple. It says, "Every minute of this life is a chance to get things right. Every moment you've been living in, you can turn it on just like a light." And I think that's such a powerful message to give to people. It's not you have to think and prepare and worry and obsess for months, even years. It's that in this moment, this very moment, you can decide, I'm going to be a better man. I'm going to treat people with respect. I'm going to live by my principles. If I don't know my principles, I'm going to work right now on discovering what they are. At least one principle, and I'm going to live that, be that. I'm going to be an exemplar of that for myself, for my children, for my family, for society. It's an amazingly powerful concept, and that's one of the great things I found valuable in this book. And one of the really valuable things I found in this, and it may be something that you don't know, but Mark was originally, I think primarily for a while, a relationship author. And so he has a lot of insights into how we relate to other people, what goes wrong in romantic relationships. But he had this really powerful line about not making people a means to an end, but an end in and of themselves. And a lot of the ways in we think we're being kind to people, we're ultimately using them for some sort of self-gratification. That really hit me like a ton of bricks. The thought that the way you feel about people, the way you treat them, should not ever be contingent on what you're going to get from them. So if it's a romantic relationship, making love, if that's your end goal, you're making them a means to an end rather than the end themselves. If it's a professional relationship, if that person is in your life or you're treating them well because you're hoping for a promotion or a good work review, again, you're using them as a means to an end instead of an end in and of itself. Now, individually, I haven't fully grasped what that means to me, but it's something I am going to have to personally put a lot of thought into, and I hope you will. So, my very, very rushed review of this book, and this isn't over, I'm going to go through some of my choice quotes, is that it, at the start, gave me hope, and then sort of it broke down why hope is not what it's cracked up to be, and then it's almost as if it gave me permission in the moment to live and be myself and to be a better person without expectation, without it being towards a goal in the future. Being good, being an honorable, honest person for the sake of being an honorable, honest person in the moment, right now. Now, the only thing, and I'm going to have to read this again, but he spends a lot of this time dissecting how, we got our hope through religion and belief in higher power. And then that belief sort of switched when people started contradicting religion, primarily due to philosophy and science. And we've since made other things our religion. So, he makes a lot of argument about why science has become the religion in many ways and all the positives. But he also makes the argument that religion has been transcended and replaced with, I shouldn't say transcended because this might be a devolution, but replaced with politics, with isms. So for instance, you could say feminism, capitalism, communism, socialism, basically social constructs that we've replaced religion with, but without this concept of us as part of a larger picture. And that has caused a lot of problems, and it's going to continue causing problems for our society. But then he goes on this line of reasoning that I'm not sure I agree with, how artificial intelligence is going to basically be the final religion and probably the solution to all our problems. And, I've noticed this problem in a lot of tech and a lot of popular culture, this idea that artificial intelligence is going to be our savior or our downfall, that it's going to destroy us or uplift us. And I personally don't know or feel that our salvation is going to come in the form of an AI. I don't know that AI in the way that they're talking about it is really something that's going to happen or not. But I found it a little disconcerting that this great book about human power ended with this idea that we're going to be supplanted by this intelligence that's going to be so far superior to us that we won't be able to understand it or comprehend it, and that it probably will save us. So I have to think a little bit more about that, but I don't like the idea of worshiping an AI as a religion. I don't necessarily like the idea that that's the end-all, be-all of our growth. I think our growth has to come from what's inside. I mean, for all of human history, we've basically believed there's something out there superior to us, and we've tried to model ourselves based on that. And so I understand where he's coming from with the idea of an AI, but I don't think the AI is going to exemplify human emotion, human existence, human perceptions of reality the way that the gods, either real or that we created, whatever you believe, exemplified. All human religion has ultimately exemplified the things we ultimately want to be and struggle to be, or the better angels that we see inside of ourselves. And I don't think you're going to find that within an artificial intelligence if one so does emerge. And so I'm not as hopeful about it, and I found it very out of place in the book. I'm hoping on a second reread I'll come to understand more what he was saying and why, but we'll have to see about that. So now I just want to take you through a couple of the really good passages I found in this book and tell you why they're important to me. Here's a quote that was really powerful to me because I never thought of things in the way that he does about the emotional brain and the logical brain, the thinking brain being separate. But listen to this quote. The feeling brain drives our consciousness car because ultimately we are moved to action only by emotion. That's because action is emotion. Now really think about that, the idea that we are moved to action only by emotion. How true is that? When you do things because you're happy, because you're in love, because you're hurt, because you're afraid, because you're motivated, but all of those things have an emotion underlying them. And that was a concept that I never actually sat down to think about. While the thinking brain exists solely within the synaptic arrangements inside your skull, the feeling brain is the wisdom and the stupidity of the entire body. I thought that was a great quote because when you think about emotion, you feel it everywhere. It affects your whole body. Whether that means it's wiser or not, that's debatable. Most men throughout history have tried to supplant their emotion with logic, reason, virtue, perception, will, but the facts are the facts. And it sounds to me, and again, I haven't delved into the research, it sounds to me like this is a very compelling argument that intuitively makes sense. Another quote, every problem of self-control is not a problem of information or discipline or reason, but just rather emotion. Self-control is an emotional problem. Laziness is an emotional problem. Procrastination is an emotional problem. Underachievement is an emotional problem. Impulsiveness is an emotional problem. This sucks because emotional problems are much harder to deal with than logical ones. And just one more quote. Moral psychologist Jonathan Haidt, sorry if I butchered your name, compares the two brains to an elephant and its rider. The rider can gently steer and pull the elephant in a particular direction, but ultimately, the elephant goes where it wants to go. That's interesting. Now, so I think this is really powerful because if we can understand the ways and reasons we do things and why we do them, we can at least have a chance at becoming the person we want to be in a holistic way that actually acknowledges our humanity, that actually acknowledges we aren't just thinking computers who make rational decisions like Spock or, an artificial intelligence. One of the ways, I think he expressed something the way that really resonated with me is the idea that the way the thinking brain can influence the emotional brain is to sort of assign value to something. And so in your brain, if you assign value to something in an emotional way, over time, you can actually make your emotional brain have a reaction to those values. And so, for instance, I'll give you an example that I struggle with. I both care very much about fitness, but I am also an addict for sugar and pizza and all sorts of junk food. And so if I can maintain my weight and not get too unhealthy, I reason myself, why shouldn't I eat junk food? It doesn't hurt me, it brings me pleasure. And so I have a very hard time dialing back my diet in ways that would improve my mental and physical well-being. But a way I could look at it is I could assign a value to exercise and diet that's both beyond myself, because that's something else he acknowledges in this book very importantly. Community is an extremely important part of who we are, what we think, what we feel. So I can assign a value that's beyond me. In eating healthy, in exercising, I'm honoring my son. I'm both teaching him a healthier way to be, establishing processes and patterns in him that hopefully will carry into life, but also I'm becoming a healthier, more powerful, more resilient person that hopefully can be here for him longer. And so if I assign the values that through doing this, I'm doing these positive things for other people, I'm exemplifying these higher things that I care about, then I can kick my emotional brain into supporting the idea. And when the emotional brain supports something, how easy it is to do something. When you care about something or engaged emotionally, you don't have to force yourself to do it, you just do it. And so I thought that was extremely interesting. Now, if you're into philosophy, stoicism, self-growth, you probably hear a lot about values and value hierarchies and how you have to establish your values, things you hold deep and dear and that you adhere and live your life to. And one of the cool things that he talks about in here is how we all have value hierarchies. And to some people, one example he uses, this girl, her value hierarchy was like partying, drinking, doing all this stuff. and work and sleep were last on terms of her value hierarchy, because she got emotional relief and enjoyment from those. And she went on like that for a long time and was living, what most of us would probably think of as a very unhealthy lifestyle. But when she went to a country where children were suffering and had the pleasure to help them, her value hierarchy completely changed. Suddenly work was important, sleep was important, helping children was important, and the partying and clubbing and all that stuff naturally fell off. So value hierarchies are very, very important, but as mentioned before, value hierarchies are influenced very, very much by emotion. So here's what I found interesting. So when we talk about growth, self-growth, growth is reprioritizing one's value hierarchy in an optimal way. So that means taking your core beliefs and either tossing them out or reprioritizing them. And I think that's a really helpful way to look at growth. You're not just saying, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. You're saying, valuing myself is an important part of my value hierarchy. But more importantly, you're letting the things that you don't truly value fall away. Do you really care that much about what car you drive? Maybe you do. But if you don't, why are you spending your life grinding away to make an $800 a month car payment? What if your value was freedom? What if your value was time with your family? What if your value was donating that money to a cause which you care about? And so that was something thought-inducing for me as an individual, because over time I've definitely felt my values shift, but in the wrong direction. And ultimately I think that's a lot of what led to some of the recent hardship, which maybe I'll describe later, in my life, and some of my not just desire but need for change. Changing your values is hard, because when you change your values and you rewrite the stories you tell yourself, it's gonna hurt. And so let me just read this. The only way to change our values is to have experiences that are contrary to our values. And any attempt to break free from those values through new or contrary experiences will inevitably be met with pain and discomfort. This is why there is no such thing as change without pain, no growth without discomfort. It's why it is impossible to become someone new without grieving the loss of who you used to be. Now that's powerful in two ways. We have to acknowledge this is going to hurt. It's going to be uncomfortable. You have to embrace that discomfort. But the other thing, and that I think is just as powerful, is the idea that you do need to grieve who you used to be. If throughout your whole childhood up until age 35 you saw yourself as a gamer and you were the best at Unreal Tournament or Dota or whatever game you played, and you decided to switch your values later in life and that you wanted to spend your time on things that you considered more fruitful, that identity of a gamer in you is going to dissolve and diminish, and it's going to have to be burned off, as Jordan Peterson would describe it, and that's going to be a very painful experience. And so I think it's okay and healthy for us to acknowledge that adversity is part of this journey, and it has to be, because you're taking a version of you that you've held on to perhaps since you were a child, and you're jettisoning things that no longer serve you or that perhaps never did serve you. But still, the ego holds on to that, and that's part of why it hurts so much. But acknowledging this, knowing why, I think can help a lot of us move forward in our life. All right, so I really love this line, and it dovetails with what I was just talking about. This is very simple. You can't think your way towards valuing something. You have to live it. How many of us buy these books like this, and while you may not consider this a self-help book necessarily, to me it is. How many of us buy these books, we read it, we think about it, but we don't take action? Again, I don't psychologically know if it's true that reason and thought and thinking cannot provide any change, but I do know that when you take action is when you truly make progress. So in a super simple example, what is the difference between thinking about going to the gym and going to the gym, and which one is going to get you more results? I really, really liked that line of thinking. And it's very simple, but oftentimes some of the best wisdom comes in aphorisms. I don't know if you remember, but earlier on in the video I talked about how he makes this philosophical argument that hope in itself is kind of a bad thing. And he makes a pretty compelling argument. But what really hit home for me about this is this idea that don't hope, be. So listen to this. Hope for this. Hope for the infinite opportunity and oppression that is present in every single moment. Hope for the suffering that comes with freedom, for the pain that comes from happiness, for the wisdom that comes from ignorance, for the power that comes from surrender. And then act despite it. This is our challenge, our calling, to act without hope, to not hope for better, to be better in this moment, in the next, and the next. And it so elegantly mirrors that Marcus Aurelius quote, this is paraphrasing, of course, to not write about or talk about what a better man is, to be a better man. To, in this moment, be better. It's all about this moment. All we have is this moment. And if you can do better, be better in this moment, everything can change. You can change. And so the idea that if there is no hope, and if hope as a construct is leading us down a dark path, what's the antidote? To be, to not hope. And I think that's a powerful argument that makes that pill, as he lays out here, a little easier to swallow. As I said earlier, one of the things I found most valuable about this book is, personally, not viewing people as means to an end. So here's this line that really meant something to me. I actually want to read a couple here. If you have to convince someone to love you, they don't love you. If you have to cajole someone into respecting you, then they will never respect you. If you have to convince someone to trust you, they won't actually trust you. And so that's really good. And so, the idea is that you go from being a child to an adolescent to an adult. And when you're an adult, you do things for the sake of the principle rather than from the hope of pleasure that will come from that principle. So you don't love someone, for instance, hoping that they're going to love you back. You just love them because love is good. So here's another little example of that. An adult will be honest for the simple sake that honesty is more important than her own pleasure or pain. Honesty is more important than getting what you want or achieving a goal. Honesty is inherently good and valuable in and of itself. Honesty is therefore an end, not a means to some other end. And really sit back and think about that with your principles and your values. Do you have those values and principles because you're hoping to get something from it? You might get something from these principles if you hold them. For instance, if one of your principles is believing in hard work, do you believe in hard work because you believe that's the nature of man, because you want to pull your weight and be valuable to others, or because you want money? I can tell you which one of those is going to yield you better results in the long term, but I can also tell you reaching that conclusion is very, very hard and takes a very long time. And I'm 40, and I'm still struggling with this. Here's just one more. An adult will love freely without expecting anything in return, because an adult understands that that is the only thing that can make love real. An adult will give without seeking anything in return, because to do so defeats the purpose of a gift in the first place. The principled values of adulthood are unconditional. That is, they cannot be reached through any other means. They are ends in and of themselves. And this last one, it's very important. And this is something that I feel gets lost on a lot of people, and lost on me in a lot of ways. You can do the right thing, but if it's for the wrong reasons, you might not get what you want. What matters are a person's intentions. The difference between a child, an adolescent, and an adult is not how old they are or what they do, but it is why they do something. Now, this is a very simple, very short quote, but it's something that's been kind of a theme through Mark's books, is that pain is unavoidable. We all know this in life. As emotional beings living in an unpredictable world that's governed by entropy, there will be pain. But what he says, and this is a great quote, is living well does not mean avoiding suffering. It means suffering for the right reasons. So do you suffer for love for your family? Do you suffer for a cause that you find noble? Or do you suffer to find money to buy a Lamborghini so that you can impress girls? Which one of those do you think is going to be more rewarding? Which one of those people do you think is going to sleep better at night? I just think that's a really salient point that we've kind of forgotten in modern culture. Every time we experience the slightest bit of pain, out comes the phone. We better, dopamine up on Facebook so that we don't have to feel what we're feeling. But, his argument is that the adult perspective is that pain is universal. Pain is part of life. You get to choose what kind of pain you suffer for the most part, though. And you also get to choose your perception of the pain and how that pain integrates with your values, which ultimately can actually make things more bearable. This is something that Jordan Peterson talks a lot about in his books, is Suffering is a part of your life. Steel yourself towards it. Accept it. Pick up the biggest load you can carry for the right reasons. And with that, you can find meaning to surpass the pain. Very great quote. Now, I just want to close out my review of this book saying, those are only a few of the quotes that means anything to me. If you look at this book, I have so many passages highlighted and underlined. Many of them require more thinking. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going through a bit of a personal tragedy, to be frank, and I have a very specific, skewed viewpoint right now about what interests me and what's valuable to me. And so I've outlined some of that, but there's a bunch to like in this book. And what I really like about it is you can tell that he has been very inspired by Stoic philosophy, which I find to be valuable, to say the least, and I'll be talking about that more in future book reviews and videos. But you can also tell that he brings a modern take to it, both by using very humorous and colorful language. There's a lot of cussing in here, silly examples, that makes it feel more accessible and modern as opposed to so serious and dour. But he also has a way of breaking things down in a different way, a more accessible way, a less borderline pious way. I love reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, but I also love reading this because it's in a way that just seems more prudent and identifiable to me as somebody who lives in the modern day. I would really recommend this book, at least for one read, to anybody that is at the very least interested in being a better person, that cares about philosophy, that would like to understand their motivations and their thinking and reasoning a little bit better, and that realizes that hope is good, but there's something even better if you can transcend hope. So if I were to rate this book, I would give it 4.5 stars out of 5. And the only reason I don't say 5 out of 5 is because I thought the crescendo of the book, being a basic worship of the oncoming AI revolution, to be a little bit out of place. Now again, on my second or third read, that might change. But otherwise, it's a fantastic book, and I highly recommend it. So I've got something I'd like to ask for all 6 of you watching this video. Can you please like, subscribe, leave a comment? That would be very, very helpful. Second, is this form of book review useful to you? For instance, is understanding how my thoughts change on the first, second, third read-throughs useful? Or should I just read it a couple times and then do a master review? And also, if there's any feedback you can do on how I can improve, I would really appreciate that, because I understand that I'm new, the production value isn't that great, and perhaps there's things I'm missing. And so if you can give me any guidance on how to get better, I'd really appreciate it. Until then, this is the Jeffy B, thanking you for joining me for my Talking Head book review of Everything is Bleeped, a book about hope.